light.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Sajid Nair, Assistant Professor, Delhi Metropolitan Education. After 3 days of an amazing lineup of films and critically and intellectually engaging deliberations on cinema and storytelling, we are back. Welcome to the fourth day of CIFFI 2020, world's first 7-day hybrid international film festival by educational institutes. Organized by DME Media School in association with Deakin University, Melbourne from December 15 to 21st, 2020. We are pleased to announce that this year, we have received over 110 films in 10 languages from various countries and Indian states, reflecting the diverse nature of this international film festival. CIFFI 2020 is a culmination of 33 sessions wherein all the facets of filmmaking will be unraveled. We have an exciting lineup of 70 experts who will enrich your knowledge with their experience and deliberations. We share this success with our festival partners, Vigyan Prasar, CMS Vatavaran, Kids Cinema 2020, We Care Film Festival, Delhi International Film Festival, our university partner, Adamas University, and institutional partners, Indian Documentary Producers Association, Indian Academy of Shorts, our media partners, The Pioneer and The Policy Times. We're also thankful to our festival partner, Mr. Tigmanshu Dhulia, for extending his support to us. I would like to inform you that we have live streaming going on in 2 platforms on our website, ciffi.dme.ac.in, with both the films and the expert sessions reaching you live. Before proceeding with the session, I would like to inform you about the films we are screening today. The screening started at 9:30 a.m. with the lineup as follows: Lollipop, Act Normal, Silence of the Ganges, Astitva, I Heard She Was Crazy, Leave, Phantasm, Her Name Was Grace, Infinite Light, Folktale, Genie and Aka, Before the Light Goes Off, Wahan Kaun Hai Tera. I wish you happy watching. For more updates, please follow our social media websites. The links will be given in the Zoom chat. CIFFI Awards at Instagram, Cineast International Film Festival of India at YouTube, and CIFFI at Facebook. I welcome you to Curated Session 2 of CIFFI 2020, Making Media and Engaging with the Industry. Before introducing the panel, I would like to request Dr. Amrish Saxena, Dean DME Media School, to please share with us a few words.
Thank you, Sachin. So welcome everybody to this morning session in India and afternoon session in Australia. And this is definitely going to be a different kind of session as compared to whatever sessions we have been organizing for the last 3 days. There, the focus was in 3 sessions were on the students' panels only, and we had discussions on children films and the filmmaking as such and the women filmmakers and all. But then this is a session wherein the media educators, researchers, professionals, they are there in the session and they are making a presentation, they are screening the films that they have made. So I'm sure this is going to give all the participants in this session a different kind of experience. and the films will be screened, and then that will be followed by discussion on those films. So I welcome all my panelists and the friends in this session, Dr. Simon Wilmot, Dr. Dirk J. Brun, Dr. Martin Potter, Dr. Vikrant Kishore, who is my fellow festival director in CIFFI 2020, and Dr. Simon Taylor. So that is all. I mean, I welcome from on behalf of DME, and then I hand it over to Vikrant Kishore. If Sachin, you have something more to do, then you please take over. Otherwise, hand it over to Vikrant Kishore to take it forward.
Yes, sir. Before we hand it over to Vikrant, sir, I would like to introduce the panelists for today to all the viewers. So first we have Dr. Vikrant Kishore. As you heard from Dr. Saxena, sir, Dr. Vikrant Kishore is also the festival co-director. Dr. Vikrant Kishore is an academic, filmmaker, photographer, author, and journalist with more than 25 documentaries and corporate films to his credit. He's also the course director for Film, Television, and Animation Deakin University, with a focus to bring due attention to the study of Indian cinema in Australia. Next, we have with us Dr. Simon Wilmot. Dr. Simon Wilmot is the Associate Head of School in the School of Communication and Creative Arts in Deakin University. A documentary filmmaker teaching film and television production, his research interest is documentary filmmaking as a practice of placemaking. We next have with us Mr. Simon Taylor. With his first professional experience in Atari Melbourne House, he moved to Sydney to work on Happy Feet as a technical assistant in the motion capture department. He both freelanced and worked full-time for Foxtel as a 3D artist before returning to work on the sequel of Happy Feet. He presently works in Deakin University's Motion Lab. Next, we have with us Dr. Martin Potter, who's a senior lecturer at Deakin University researching on participatory media. He produces documentaries and transmedia projects, including the SXSW award-winning Big Stories and Small Towns, the TED Prize-winning Stereo Public, Crowdsourcing the Quiet, and the acclaimed White Building program in Cambodia. Dr. Dirk de Bruin, our fourth panelist for the day, has made numerous animations, performance, and installation work since 1973 in Australia. In the early 90s, de Bruin lived and practiced his no-budget filmmaking in Vancouver. I welcome all the panelists, and I hand over the mic to Vikrant, sir.
Hello, a very good morning to you all in India, and a good day to everyone who's joining us from different parts of the world. Firstly, I acknowledge the traditional landowners from in Australia, where we are addressing this particular panel discussion. I pay my respect to the elders, past and present, and we start with a remembrance of them for this particular session. So, of course, I've got four of my really, amazing colleagues here who have done so much of work both in the industry and as you would have heard that we have people from filmmaking to animation. So Dirk is very well known for his animation storytelling. Simeon's work and Happy Feet and and those are very big films that you would have heard of, and I'm sure you would have seen. Martin is a big storyteller, and he has been in, he shared his views about a day back or 2 days back with his students and how he has been working in the area of fiction film and getting his students make interesting film stories. And Simon is probably the most experienced of all in terms of Australia-India relations. He has done so many work. He has been working in India and the space around India for last, I think, more than 2 decades. And he made this interesting film on Kotla Mubarakpur, which he can, of course, talk more about it. And he has also recently made a film on the Aboriginals in the Northern Territory. So there are some interesting things that all our staff members do here at Deakin. And this is a great opportunity for us to talk. We always meet, we always talk about so many things, but we never get to sit down and talk about our work in detail like this opportunity has created for us. So I would rather move on to my first question, and I'll ask Dirk. And the question is about, firstly, it's like an introductory. So if you can introduce about yourself and your academia work and your industry projects. So this is a question for all of us to answer. And I'm being a co-moderator here with Amrish, but I'm also being a participant, and I'm also going to talk about my work. So Dirk, let's start with you.
Okay, thanks, Vikrant. So you want to know a bit about my background? I've kind of worked in both sort of documentary and animation, and more recently I've started working in with looking at the landscape and document that. I started making films in 16mm, back in the 70s, and more recently kind of moved into working sort of digitally and sort of capturing those things, which are a lot more easily than I used to have to work with in the past in terms of with film, which took a lot more time in a sense, in the pre-production and production process. What else would you like to know?
Dirk, you have you have made some interesting projects, and you have been in various international film festivals. You have been screening your films across the world. So tell us about your recent work, and you also one of your film here is also for screening as well. So maybe we can talk about that later, but tell us more about your industry engagement and the kind of work that you have been screening.
Yeah, well, in a sense, I've kind of always worked in the kind of more installation kind of area or in performance, and I kind of enjoy sort of performing live, within kind of festivals. And I've had where I get projectors and I sort of play them and sort of move them around the room and sort of have a kind of direct experience. And I'm kind of interested in this idea of trauma in terms of storytelling. I kind of find that I am interested in the emergence of story. So sort of the incompleteness and the experimental side of that has always kind of been of interest to me. And I've kind of connected to that kind of community internationally, which has become kind of stronger since we've been able to kind of travel sort of digitally around the world. But my work go back over a long period of time in terms of working also abstractly. And I know that when I started, the films I used to make, those more abstract films I used to make were maybe half an hour long. But now, because of people's attention spans have sort of shifted so much and people are much more articulate about how an image is impacted, I mean, those films are now a lot shorter and a lot more sort of complex, partly because attention spans have gone down, but also at the same time, as I said, people's the complexity and the sophistication people have in pulling an image apart is just so much stronger these days. So, and I've also kind of worked in, done a bit of work in documentary. My most successful kind of work there was a film that I made about my mother when my parents migrated to Australia in the 50s, where I moved from. We went to the sites where those films, where those events took place, and we would sort of talk about those events. So this idea of a story being embedded in the landscape and sort of emerging out of it is kind of real interest to me. And especially this, sometimes you can go back, you can have forgotten something, but if you go back to that place whether you're born or where you've lived, those stories just sort of come back to you, because of where you are. And that is kind of interest to me.
Great, thanks, Dirk.
Can I ask, Vikrant, can I ask Dirk a question?
Yes, please.
So Dirk, an important aspect of Dirk that should be brought to everyone's attention is that Dirk is rated as one of the most significant independent and experimental filmmakers in Australian history. In fact, in a recent survey of independent filmmakers, and experimental filmmakers, he was rated as the 5th most influential independent and experimental filmmaker in Australia. So we're really privileged to have Dirk. And Dirk's approach to filmmaking is very different to mine, for instance, and a lot of the ways we might traditionally think about film. Dirk, can you just explore a bit more about the way that film for you is not a separated thing to you as a person and your worldview?
Thanks, Simon. I mean, our films might be different, but we often have discussions about sort of things within the landscape or whatever that where our subjects are kind of can be similar. Well, you know, I've always been interested in this idea of the technologizing of the self, you know, right from the start. I kind of wanted to make films as a way of writing and diaristic kind of way of grabbing things. And kind of that meant that I had to learn how these different technologies work and try to make them as fluent for me as it is to talk, you know. I kind of had, I mean, I don't think, you know, for everybody it turned out that way, but that was always part of my approach. In terms of what Simon says about the experimental side of it, I mean, that relates a bit to my, you know, the community side of my work, and that I've always sort of felt the importance of having a community of kind of artists and trying to develop that and provide a space where people could talk and people could share work. And one of my things that I was really interested in a lot were this idea of open screenings, where you know, you could have a screening and anyone can come in off the street and show a piece of work and to other people as a way into a community or into an industry, you know, as a way of starting those things up. And that comes out of those ideas of open systems that, you know, were very big in the 60s in terms of community development, etc., in terms of more politically evident kind of areas. Yeah.
Great.
That's
Thanks.
right.
So probably Simon can respond to the question again, and because he mentioned that his is very opposed to what Dirk does. So yeah, Simon, give us a.
Well, it's not so much opposed in a sense of I disagree at all with Dirk, and as he said that we cover many similar territories, but although I don't think the self, you can extract the self from film, my way, and in fact, my practice is actually thinking about the way self-making happens in place, and I use film for that. And I certainly accept my presence in the filmmaking process as part of the film. So I'm not trying to hide. I'm a documentary maker, but I don't try and hide myself and hide my presence from the process. In fact, I know that often the content of what I make, the content of the films I'm making is created by my presence there. And I self-consciously go into a situation knowing that my presence is going to generate the material from which I make the film. The film in Kotla in New Delhi was exactly that the only events that the film is made, all the events that the film was made from only occurred because there was a camera and an anthropologist wandering around in that space talking to people. So self is very much part of that. But I'm not so much interested in myself as the general sense of selves. I would be terrified of the idea of making a film about myself. I think Dirk is incredibly brave and open, honest human being. There's a line there that I would be terrified of stepping over. And so I think on the whole, I kind of view films a little bit more as an objective thing that you throw out into the world, and that has, in its relationship to other people, is some ways not as much of a, I mean, the making of the film is very much what I'm part of, and then the film goes out into the world and it is as it is. And so, you know, I would seek exhibition and distribution in those kind of normalized channels of television and cinema, as not directly interested in making films to create a local sense of engagement, which is a bit odd because on the other side of me is Martin, I think, who kind of is very interested in, he'll talk a bit about this too, but I suspect that we also share similar territory, and the idea of film is community creation and community making. And so I completely understand and respect that idea too. And so again, my films have been, I think, part of that idea. But, you know, I kind of aspire to making a work at some point that gets on in the cinema, although I never wander in that direction. I always seem to be more attracted to working with anthropologists and going off on adventures. So I suppose that's another way I could explain my practice. It's an adventure. And the kind of wilder, the more interesting place I could be offered, I will head off in that direction. And there is an interesting ethical issues around there, because I'm faced with that question about why I can film other people you know, why I choose to film other people and represent other people. And in some ways I'm doing that because ultimately I'm interested in myself, but that's a very personal thing. You know, there is this line, I don't want to be in the film as such about me, but by discovering and thinking about other people and other worlds, I think in the end, the truth is that I'm learning about myself. So there's it's a kind of complicated thing, I suppose, in the process that gets me into a film. So the invitation or the possibility of going to India to make a film fitted my curiosities on many levels. One of which was that going somewhere else is always an interesting way of discovering something about yourself. Going somewhere else is always interesting way of discovering about somewhere else. And then when you're there, around respecting who you're working with and respecting the world you're in, you know, you have to, for my filmmaking practice, I let that world take over and direct me in where I'm going. So my films tend to follow people. I tend to be reactive to what people want to say and do. I know that through the camera, I can influence the world. You know, where I stand with a camera will influence the way people move around. If I'm filming or not filming, it does change the way people behave. So I'm not having an influence in the world, but I believe that they are collaborations with those people. I go to a place and I'm Simon the filmmaker. I never try and make friends with somebody as just Simon and then turn up with a camera. I try and arrive at that doorstep with a camera saying, hi, I'm a filmmaker. Can I make a film about you? And let them lead me from there in what interests them. And what I think ultimately interests most people is a sense of home, a sense of place, a sense of self-identity. And they become the issues that are central, I found, to the films I've been making. And so the Kotler film was very interesting in the way that the people I film definitely wanted the opportunity to renegotiate who they were in their world because of the nature of that place of Kotler. And when we were filming in 2003, India was rapidly expanding and opening up to the outside world. You know, the post-late 80s changes in the economy were really kicking in, and people were gaining quite significant wealth and rebuilding their houses and remaking their suburbs. And so the dynamics and how dynamic Kotler was at the time in that remaking just sucked the camera along. And the film I've kind of made in Cape York in far north Queensland about the Lama Lama community shares in common with that film that the Lama Lama, like many Australian Aboriginal groups, as they regained possession and recognition for the ownership of their country, they had to do something that very few other human beings have had to do, which is to rapidly invent a new way of living on their country, in their place. They weren't going to be living as that traditional black fellas, and they certainly weren't going to be living as white fellas. And they were kind of not going to be completely in modernity the way we would understand it in the city. So there was an aspect of a rural world that they were going to embrace, an Aboriginal world that they were going to embrace, and they were going to choose from modernity as they wished to. And they were consciously having to invent a life. They were also having to deal with the process that won them the right back to their country. And that process was remaking the way authenticity about being an Aboriginal person had to be negotiated, but also what identity groupings were. So the whole notion of the Lama Lama is what the film is about in a way. It's about the invention of this idea of Lama Lama-ness and how to think about being authentically Lama Lama. So they were remaking their world, and the invitation for me to go there and film was because the leader of that community, at the time, Sunlight Bassini, he could see the power of a camera in that process and to give him authority in that process as well. And so that film's very important because of the circumstances modern Australia is having to deal with in coming to terms with the fact that we stole the land from Aboriginal people. And so for me, gaining an understanding about that issue more is fundamental to my sense of belonging in this place. So there again, it's kind of like, it's about me, but I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about, something else other than me, but to learn about me.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. We'll get back to you more on that film. So I'll move on to Martin. And as Simon mentioned, that Martin also works in the participatory media quite a lot, and the project Small Towns, Big Stories, and there are many projects which Martin has been part of, and really good to see some of those. So Martin, tell us a bit about yourself and your projects.
Thanks. I, as Simon kind of noted, and you did as well, Vikrant, in the intro, I do a lot of participatory media. So I work with people to make stories. And like Simon, I often form, relationships based on the fact that we're going to make something together. Maybe it's because I'm, generally quite socially uncomfortable, and I have to use the film as a mechanism for developing relationships, socially awkward filmmaking, or relational media. I don't know what you'd like to call it. So I use participation as a way of bringing people together to think creatively about the place that we're in, the community that we're a part of, or that they are a part of, and I've been invited in some way, shape or form. And then, the media, the films, the photos, the stories that emerge are often ways of developing a vision for people about, where they would like to go, reflecting on who they are, where they are, and then where they want to go. And I've used this kind of notion of positive deviance, so working with people who have the same resources as everybody else around them, but are somehow able to do something extraordinary in their place, and working in communities that are often marginalized or disenfranchised or represented in the media in a negative light, and then bringing a lens of positive deviance to those communities kind of remediates their identity, not just for themselves, but for other people who then watch the films and can experience this kind of alternate insight into the way that people are. So yeah, the other thing about the projects that I work on is they're often transmedia, so they go across different mediums. Dirk, I suppose, kind of just referred to some of his practices. This open screening idea based on that old school notion, the open system, the cybernetics kind of systems approach to human systems. Like, we've made up everything in the world, and we can obviously remake it. And often the stories that we tell are really extraordinary agents in being able to facilitate that change. So I've found that that's another thing that I am able to do with the films, is that we can use those films as a way of opening up new spaces for discussion, opening up new collaborations, and opening up new kind of spaces for discussion, and having the stories themselves that emerge from this process of creation. It suddenly opens up the potential for change. And the most effective way I've found that can happen is that we work across a range of different media. So we work across linear films, we work across, the cinema space. We often broadcast stuff on television, but also radio, online, in installation, exhibition-based works as well. So there's multiple ways into the stories, moving things across media in that way. That transmedia approach often means that people can find their own way into the stories, and that's quite exciting. And I think with a lot of digital media, it's a lot of digital stuff has expanded our opportunities to make and share content. And when we're able to link the different media spaces together in a really surprising way, it can create some fantastic stuff. So yeah, I don't know if I should talk about specific projects at the moment, or if we'll get to that a little bit later. I suppose that's my Yeah,
Little.
yeah. Well, that's my broad kind of introduction to myself and my general approach to things as a participatory and transmedia kind of focused creative media maker.
Thanks for that, Martin. And I'll move on to Simeon. So Simeon, yeah, you have done some exciting projects. So tell us a bit more about you and your projects. You have to unmute yourself. You can't? The host, can you unmute?
Hang on. Oh, wait, there we go. And now I can talk. The host has been kind enough to unmute me. Oh, okay, what to say? So actually, I'm going to start with my background, and my background is in film. More specifically, film and animation. And as has been mentioned, my main claim to fame on film was working on a series of films, the Happy Feet films, and then Mad Max Fury Road for a brief period. And in all of that, so you could say my background is visual effects, which in recent years has like become much more like, the application of visual effects for things like animation, and always for storytelling. These days I'm currently involved with ways to use augmented reality and virtual reality to capture memories. And in a way, if you think about it, that really is just storytelling, which is what we're all here for. And yeah, so recently, my focus has been on reminiscence. So I've been talking to people. It's like interviewing people and capturing their experiences, and then kind of trying to distill, what's at the core of what they're trying to share, and then figuring out some way to illustrate it or to display it through animation. Yeah, and so yeah, thanks to my background, it's a strongly technical background. So I consider all the different ways that you can animate. I use motion capture. I use visual. I like computer animation. Computer animation. I am a terrible drawer. I have to put that out right now. But on the other hand, I'm great. I'm great with computer animation, and that's like one of my strengths. I'm gonna leave it there.
Thanks, Simeon. And that's a very interesting kind of work that you have done. And people, at least I know that the students at DME, they are very interested in animation and they would like to know more about yours and Dirk's work. In fact, the other day for animation panel, there were more than 400 students and participants, rather. I shouldn't say 400 students, but participants. So it is quite a huge area where people are interested, but animation teaching is not that big still in India. So that's why it always gets the attention of students. Also, I'll just briefly talk about my work. And in fact, I'm trying to collaborate these days. And Martin and I, we have recently started working on a project which is storytelling through online media. And this is one project we are doing. And hopefully, Amrish Saxena is going to be a part of it. And we are just working through looking at storytelling, especially micro storytelling. So storytelling of 2 to 3 minutes, micro stories, capturing short stories of people. And we are focusing on the Indian diaspora at the moment. So that's another kind of area that I'm trying to capture the stories of the Indian diaspora in Australia and how they are, especially post COVID-19, how the Indian diaspora is trying to communicate or how to tell their stories to the wider audience, especially in India. And there have been lots of people who have come out with their own specific stories. But other than that, my own work is more in the area of culture and Indian cinema. So these are the things that I've been, and anyway, I've talked in different platforms of DME about my work. So I'm not going to focus more. But my recent work, which today I want to talk about, was like an accidental work. It was not accidental, but in a way, when due to COVID-19, for my documentary class, I had asked them to make projects sitting at home, and everybody was working with their mobile cameras and doing things. And and one of the students said, "Why don't you also, work along us and make a project?" And I said, "Oh, that's a good idea. Probably I'll try to do a kind of a self-reflexive story about myself during COVID-19." And I started recording. And then I said, my story is becoming just like everyone else's story. And then I thought, and then at that point of time, my wife was doing some interesting videos of my 6-year-old daughter, who was very keen to share her point of view on various things. And she recorded her view on COVID-19, and she put it online, that what Pariza, my 6-year-old daughter, thinks about COVID-19 during these times. And it was very interesting. Lots of people liked it. And I thought that, oh, you have already got so much of footage of Pariza doing so many things. So I said, okay, let me try and convert this into a film. And that's became an interesting kind of a thing. I thought that I'm just going to create a montage sort of a thing. And it almost took me almost about more than 1.5 months to work through all those footage that my wife and some I captured. And then we ended up making a 30 minutes film. And then now when I look back at it, and it's an interesting story of a 6-year-old and her point of view during COVID-19, as opposed to what the adults think. And yesterday, last evening, we had a very interesting panel on children's film. And there was some interesting people across the world who had joined in. And that was the time I started thinking, oh, I actually made a children's film, film focused on children and their point of view. And I was never thinking about it. I was thinking that, okay, I'm doing it. Maybe I'm just doing a montage for my daughter or things like that for my memory's sake. And then suddenly it has become more than the memory's sake. It has a particular point of view or a voice of that 6-year-old child. And she is telling her story. It is not my thing. It's not Kirti's thing. It's her point of view. It's her voice. And yesterday, that whole point of view or particular thought got really strengthened after listening to so many important people who are running children's film festival across the world. And I've never thought about being into that area or in that space of making films for children or a film on a child, but that happened accidentally. But I thought it was a good kind of a result of this COVID-19 situation. So anyway, I'll show you a little bit of clip later on. But Ambriji, you had some questions so for all of us, so probably I'll move on to you. You're muted.
Yeah, Vikrant. So I've seen perhaps some of the clippings that you were putting out of whatever you were shooting. So I have some idea. But then definitely, this has always been a challenge since the time this COVID-19 is struck. I mean, as not only about documentary, but then about the fiction. I wrote a story and I was thinking to propose you to suggest to you that let us shoot it, some part of it in India and some part in Australia, and then we can make a short fiction story. But that's still in the offing. So because this was a time when we had to think that what new can be done under whatever restrictions or prohibitions which were in place. And obviously documentary, my own students have made certain fiction, certain documentaries, though that is, as I look at their work, it is more in the nature of experiments. They have not come out with something substantial because of the, obviously because of the reason that nobody had ever thought of this kind of situation. Nobody would have ever planned as to how to meet these kind of challenges and make the films. So definitely, this is something great that you thought of doing this, and I would love to see to this. I mean, the work that you have done, and then as far as your I mean long-term planning is concerned, like as you said about the storytelling or the micro storytelling. So I would like to know more as to what exactly your thought on micro storytelling and what are plans you have to take this forward.
Well, what we are trying to do, this is a project which Martin and I, we have come up with this particular project on, it's called Desi Flows, Storytelling Through Online Media. So Desi Flows basically looking at the stories of the diaspora, because diaspora in a way, it's a kind of a vernacular word, Desi, for, Indians settled abroad. So we have just used that particular terminology here. And it is more about, it's not about how how the Indians or diasporic Indians are receiving Indian stories. Bollywood is big, and people always talk about Bollywood and things like that. But how the stories of Indian diaspora community members is flowing back to India? Are we able to tell those stories in an interesting format? And there is a big problem, and there is a big gap in that particular story. The stories about NRIs or non-resident Indians is generally fueled by Bollywood in a very fantastical, dreamlike situation where NRIs or non-resident Indians or diaspora, they have achieved huge success in the country they are in, be it, and it's always about US, UK, or all the Western countries, and they are living that lavish lifestyle. Their life is the best to imitate for Indians, and that is the kind of storyline or plot line has always been rather misused. And what we are trying to do is to show the stories of actual diaspora, their concerns, their challenges, their opportunities, and their success. So looking at all the kind of aspects that we are doing, but also building a kind of a network of storytellers between India and Australia, and to amplify that across both the places. So it's not just about trying to find a good viewership of diasporic stories, but also getting into collaboration to tell these stories effectively, and also to recognize the kind of work that is being done in this area. So Martin, would you like to add something more? Probably I've not covered everything, but you can also.
No, I think that was great. I mean, I suppose the one of the interesting things that you kind of highlight is this idea of having a multi-voiced, so lots of different experiences are being represented, and rather than just putting them in a single line, as you would do in a normal film, where it's just this linear experience and you start at the beginning and you move through to the end, we have these small fragments. And I suppose that reflects the prism of experiences that people have had. I think that's a really lovely approach to create a more nuanced understanding of Desi identity and the whole wide range of experiences that flow from that. So yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about the potential for this project, and just very happy to be a part of it. So hey, thanks.
And yeah, thanks, Martin. And one of the things that we are looking.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, sorry.
Uh,
Yeah, one of the things that I should mention that what Martin and I are looking is not only about telling stories, but also creating an opportunity to to create storytellers. So we have also embedded lots of these training modules within that particular project to create storytellers and to give opportunity to people who without any skills of storytelling on online media to learn that particular skill and to tell the stories, and pick up a mobile phone and do a story on themselves and share it. In fact, about a couple of months back in your conference, Martin and I, we both presented on this particular project, and we had also started a Facebook group where we asked people to come and share their stories. Of course, that hasn't taken off in that big way, the way we wanted, because of COVID-19 and all those things that we have not yet formally started on this research project. So the formal starting is going to be 2021 June onwards, where we actually work on it. So at the moment, it's all planning stage and working through that.
So Vikrant, I mean, whatever you have thought on this, will it be confined to Indian diaspora in Australia, or you can even think of including the other neighboring countries in Australia? One, two, whether you would also like to include the people from the Indian subcontinent who are in Australia, including the people from Pakistan and Bangladesh as well?
At the moment, it's going to be just focused on the Indian community and not the South Asian community. And because we are starting in a kind of a very small way, so we are just keeping it very small. But then the collaboration between Australia and India, and that's why we are collaborating between 3 different universities in India. So the collaboration is with DME, with you. Then there is a collaboration with Jamia Millia Islamia. And then there is another institute called Birla Institute of Technology, BIT, in Ranchi. So these are the places where we are actually going and collaborating with staff and other students to get them, skilled in micro storytelling, not just storytelling, but micro storytelling for online media, and collaborate with people within the Indian diaspora here in Australia. So it is a bit, in itself, it's a quite of a challenging kind of a work, working across 3 different institutions and working around almost what we are thinking of, at least getting 30 to 40 short stories out of it. And the more we talk, the more ideas I get, and Martin will also
Yeah,
getting
yeah. Grant is talking about capturing all Indian stories or Indian diaspora story in Australia. So, Simon, what do you feel? What kind of stories you came across while you were staying in India, in New Delhi? What all work you did, and what all work you feel is still left, and you must be having in mind that if I get time, that I will be capturing all such stories from India.
I thought a dominant, I see stories as things that emerge out of a dialectic, that stories are a response to conflicts of some sort, and typically stories are about change. And so my experience as an outsider observing the world of Kotler led me to form a view that in India there's this very strong, dominant, universal tension between modernity and tradition, and that the primary interest that the people I was filming in India were having was trying to work out who they were in a modern world, and what it was to be modern and to be Indian, because the idea of Indian comes often with a sense of tradition, but traditions are things that are emerging in the present. The tradition is something that we speak about in the present. It doesn't exist other than in the moment you emerge and speak it from. So although to be Indian attaches to a sense of a tradition, and things brought from the past, it's very much a contemporary idea. And so to that extent, to say I am Indian in some ways to try and define that is to negotiate both the past and perhaps a future sense of the present as much as the current present. And so that I think can also be seen in most Bollywood films, and just to generalize, the arc of the story terribly tends to be around somebody who's got out of sorts with their world around them for some kind of selfishness of some description, either because they've fallen in love with someone they shouldn't fall in love with, or because they're being prevented from falling in love with somebody that they should fall in love with. So there's a kind of a selfishness that begins the story, and then at the end of it, there's a kind of harmonization with the world around. And it seems to me that often in the end of Indian films is a harmony that people where it doesn't necessarily the capacity or the chance to have that resolution in our current life doesn't exist, but in the film it does. And I don't think that as a criticism of film. I think that that's the job of stories, is to offer hope of resolutions that otherwise might never occur, and that the business of telling stories is about producing senses of hope. So wherever there is conflict of sorts, there is the chance to tell a story and a need to tell a story. And so I think that India, because India is going, is a place of a level of transformation and change, particularly for a lot of people that amount of change is different to different groups, but there's certainly the people who are seeking to come in from the rural worlds, seeking to come in from those places which have been slower to change than the city, for whom change is just an extraordinary experience that's beyond my experience of change, where I experience change in my world at a much slower pace. So India always seems to be more potent as a place of stories than my immediate neighbourhood. Although that's, change, any change is worth telling a story, and where there's a need to make a change. And so the thing that's really been interesting me more in recent years is about how settler colonial Australians like myself get to think about the world and modify their view of the world to in some ways recompense or reconcile the fact that we took the land away from Aboriginal people. That needs to be, that's the top priority in a sense in my immediate neighbourhood. But when I look out at my street, there's not the sign of the need to change like there is when you're standing on a street corner in Kotla, where there seems to be stories everywhere. And it's a very exciting kind of storytelling place.
So Simon, the kind of conflict that you noticed while you were in Delhi with regard to modernity and the tradition. So do you find the same kind of conflict among the Indian diaspora living in Australia, or do you find some difference as far as the dimensions or the scale of this conflict?
Well, I think the change for diaspora is not so much a conflict between the idea of a modern Indian and what it is to be a traditional Indian, but it's between wanting to be an Indian and the pressure to be somebody else entirely different, which is what a hybrid multicultural place is doing to people. Although multiculturalism kind of offers the chance to preserve something of where you're from, ultimately place matters. And the ground you're standing on matters. So as a simple example is that right now, this event could be entirely disrupted by a thunderstorm that might occur over the top of us here in Melbourne that wipes out our power and shuts down the internet. So while we can connect to the outside world, the immediate events in this locality actually matter to how we can connect with that world. And place matters in our sense of identity. And so anybody who's shifting, any place you live in, even somebody moving within inside India, you know that somebody moving from Kerala to Bengal will suffer a similar kind of problem. But, if I move to Sydney, Sydney has a slightly different culture. You have to remake yourself. So place matters. And when you've got a strong sense of identity that's different to where you've moved to, then inevitably there's going to be a conflict around how you negotiate yourself, how you remake self. I mean, self, I think, again, is something that only occurs in the moment that you contemplate that idea. And it's the sense we make of the world we're around us. So the moment you are confronted anytime with who am I, then the idea of self is emerging. So self is always emerging, and you're always having to negotiate with the world around you about what that is. And for migrants, that's always a more acute, intense experience than for somebody who has some sort of reconciliation about who they are in that place.
Yeah, and that just to sort of butt in there, I mean, as a migrant myself, I mean, I can think of my practice as one of trying to make sense of who I am in this foreign place, which became my home, and which I settled into. And the sort of fragments and the things about identity are about that process, really, And I think those things in this COVID situation become even more extreme because we're kind of forced to focus on where we are and who we are in the place that we occupy, whereas a lot of my my career has been based on kind of showing stuff internationally. I kind of welcome, in a sense, this opportunity now to refocus back on the land where I live and the impact of those things, Yeah. And I'm sure that there is a difference between Vikrant, for example, living in Australia and how he deals with those things and how he would have dealt with those similar issues, back in India.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the kind of first generation migrant experience, and which generally is very different from the second generation migrant, like what my daughter is experiencing. For her, India is a foreign country. For her, India is somewhere she visits. For me, India is still the place that I still am from. I'm still there, even if I'm in Australia for last 15 years or more. I still feel like an Indian, and I still think like an Indian, and that's the kind of a in between two different countries. And of course, as Simon mentioned, that you have to start responding to the place. Uh, but then that's the difference, which probably was a big challenge for people who initially migrated, maybe 20, 30 years back, when Indians were very in small numbers migrating to Australia. So for them to integrate with the majority community was important, while in the second or third generation now, with the Indian community forming, becoming the third largest migrant group in Australia now there is a certain sense of ownership or understanding of the place, so that people can find their own religious places, people can have their own sense of community, people can have their own community group. So dissolving themselves, or so-called integrating themselves, is much lesser than what the initial migrants faced. So that has probably changed. When I came in, I used to find myself as a kind of the only person around mostly. Now, in 15 years, things have changed, and also the assertion of the identity also takes place after, when there is a sizable kind of a diasporic community, then the assertion in terms of cultural, or in a way reimagination, reassertion happens. And one project which I did was in 2016. It was a kind of a multimedia uh, exhibition which I did in the Parliament of Victoria. It was called the Dance of the Hindu Gods. So it was basically looking at the Indian diasporic community as to how they preserve their particular cultural roots. So we were looking at the temple art, we were looking at the dance forms, and we were also looking at the modern interpretation of the dance forms with things like we had a ceramic artist, Nandita uh, Natkarni, and she, in her ceramic art, she uses lots of Hindu gods motifs like Ganesha, Shiva, and others as well. So we integrated the aspects of dance and the cultural roots and cultural practices that the Indian diaspora in modified ways were doing are doing in Australia. So for example, if there is a Durga Puja celebration in Australia, it is not going to be a public holiday for people here, or especially for Bengalis here. But what people are doing, that even if Durga Puja falls in on Monday or Tuesday, or for whatever 10 days, what they are doing is that they are doing 2 days of intensive Durga Puja, all the 10 days celebration or 9 days celebration in a community hall or place or public place, and they do it. So there are different ways of exploring them, and that is what is happening. And these are the stories which fascinates me. And when I've been discussing the idea about micro storytelling, those were the stories that was in my mind. And when we were discussing with Martin, and Martin covered in his particular stories, small stories, I'm forgetting the name of the project.
Big stories, small towns.
Yeah, big stories, small towns, not small stories. Yeah. And there was a kind of I could see that we think in the same way, and storytelling is never about which culture you come from, because there are so many things that we can find common. So Martin's ideas and Martin's particular way of thinking and way of storytelling really, inspired me in a way, and also made me enthusiastic that I have got this person who can really lead me to think out of the box and think, not letting me just being in that Indian mode and thinking about stories through Indian perspective, but as an outsider as well. And that's what, as storytellers, at times, while we need to be embedded and we need to tell our stories, but sometimes we need to just move out of that zone and tell our stories as well. So yeah, and I was one thing I was interested in, this is with Dirk and maybe Simeon as well, was about the installation projects and the kind of these work that Dirk has been doing. And this is something very new for Indian students or Indian participants about these kind of installation works or installation medias. And I would definitely like you to talk more about those and give them an idea as to what it entails.
Okay, well, especially if I might go first, especially seeing we're talking about migration, etc. My performances tend to be very traumatic and they're very overwhelming, because I have got about 3 or 4 things happening at once, and I have projectors which I then mirror things onto walls, etc. So people are in a space, and then there's action and stuff going on all around you. So for me, that comes back to this sort of moment of, as an 8-year-old, of coming to Australia and trying to make sense of this new place that I came in. And I became aware of that because I did a performance in Utrecht in Holland a couple of years ago, and I do a lot of kind of voice stuff in terms of yelling out things, and it's kind of sort of becomes this kind of yelling sort of. Anyway, I found myself, I was gutturally expressing all these kind of Dutch kind of phrases, not words, just the way the Dutch use their voice. So I started to understand that really that this whole project for me to get into this kind of overwhelming space was a way of talking in a very visceral way, in a very direct way, of the experience of being abducted from one culture and put into another. And this idea too that I had a very deep connection to something that I did not understand within another culture. And it was my way of bridging that gap. I became aware of that through the journey. And, Simon talked about the fact that it's my work is very focused on a personal focus, but it's really also about how all those cultural impulses come back on you, and I like the idea of being able to express that on a very direct, sort of fragmented way. And I think that's a very important experience for us today when we're sort of bombarded by so much media and we have to try and make a narrative of some sort out of that. And you talked about story, story to me, the old way of using story was kind of a linear narrative, that kind of A, B, C, D, E. I think these days it's much more fragmented. It's more total. A lot of things are happening at the same time, and you have to learn how to unpack that very quickly because of the speed of information. And I think part of the project I'm interested in, and I'm also hearing other people talking about, is this idea of how do you make sense of this world, in finding new ways of doing that, both visually and with sound, because you have to do it quickly because there's so much happening, and we have to make so many snap judgments about what's going on. And I'm kind of interested in that project and use those kind of strategies to try and get a deep dive into those kind of ideas that I see coming out of the projects that other people are talking about as well. That's the end of my little rant.
I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, just in the sense that, like, a few years ago, I was involved in a research project with the Victorian Opera here in Australia, and it was essentially what we were doing was we were looking at, like, instead of static backgrounds, we were looking at, like, essentially creating these immersive animated backgrounds. Like, we had these huge, like, wraparound screens that filled the entire back of the stage. And they're absolutely enormous, and we filled it with these visuals. Now, as we were working on it, we kind of, like, we were doing too good a job. We were coming to this point where we started to realize, like, the director was, he couldn't put his finger on it, and we sat around and we're going, like, what's wrong here? And we realized that we were distracting from the performers themselves. We were creating these beautiful imagery, and but losing what was at the heart of it. And so the point I'd like to make is that with storytelling in general, is just to, it's easy to lose sight of what you're trying to tell. It's easy to forget, what's the thing you're trying to communicate. And with my background in visual effects, it's way too easy to get wrapped up in that. But you know, it's about communicating. And you know, so with the Victorian Opera, we figured out how to basically dial it down a bit, bring it back to the performances, and let the performers themselves you know, tell the story, basically.
Right.
Like Vikrant, if as you refer to the session on animation that we had day before yesterday, the kind of interest that was seen among the Indian students. So if I can ask Simeon, because he has been into animation and visual effect both. Now, if you look at the animation stories from the Indian perspective, what do you find? I mean, what are the connections that we find between the way the animation is done in India and in Japan or in other countries or vis-a-vis Australia? Can you throw some light on storytelling through animation in the different countries and different approaches which are followed?
Um, so actually, I'm gonna bring that directly to the people I'm teaching, the people that I have in my own classes, and what I love, is, so you know, in first year of teaching, people just make stuff, and it's you know, it's that at that initial level, and they're discovering their craft, they're discovering their techniques. But then you start, then come second and third year, you start to see them actually use it to tell their own stories. And I love seeing when someone like decides that rather than, because you get people who shy away from their own homes, from their own culture, like they, you know, they just, you get some people who basically follow the Hollywood line and just want to try and make something that they feel is going to be just like mass popular. But then the really beautiful stuff is when people actually embrace their background, embrace their culture, and but two things come out of it. It's not just the way that it's not just the story itself that they're telling, but it's the way they tell it. It's they marry into it, like, you know, the kind of imagery or the kind of art that, you know, comes from their own culture, from their own country, and they are far and away like the strongest pieces, because they actually, like I was saying before, they've actually hung on to what it is, you know, what's the important thing that they want to share. And I love seeing that. And so, you know, when I think about you know, the Japanese animation, uh, you get I've just got to say, like, Japanese animation has such an intricate kind of level of detail to it. And when I think about, you know, things that I've seen from India, they have just this. I know I'm being fairly general here, but they have such a wonderful sense of like color and music, which is like a really strong thing they bring. That's that part of it, and there's also that's at the very personal level. And then in the general level, there's also the fact, I'm not sure if you were really wondering about this, but the way that animation houses are opening up all over the world. I know that there's a strong growth in India of like production houses opening up branches in India, which is exciting to see.
If I can, I mean, in continuation with the same question, if I can ask this to Doug, since you are into animation and you are an expert into that area, because whatever discussions in India are happening on this issue, as the same happened day before yesterday, the Indian animators are trying to evolve something which is original and which is purely Indian. So, can you tell us what is that particular thing in animation which is universal and which is particularly confining to a particular country, whether it's India or Australia or any other part of the world?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, listening to what Simeon had to say too, I mean, I think of animation as a technology, and our whole history is a series of different technologies, you know, and that have graphic components to them. And there is a strong history in India, as there is in Japan and China, of sort of graphic styles in terms of drawing, painting, and architecture and patterning and all those things. And I think the issue is, and the problem is always to translate and migrate those aesthetics and those strategies and those techniques into the new medium. And I think that's the greatest kind of truth, to find the actual historical connection between previous kind of works that have been shared culturally within a culture and have become important because of this symbolism, etc. I mean, those things happened historically for a reason as well. And that's a great resource to have to translate that, and to, I think of it as migrating that into the new technologies, you know. And the strongest national works are the ones that do that kind of well. You know, I bring that back to the situation that we're living in now, which is one where every day we migrate. You know, when we're online, we're kind of migrating now. We're in two places at once. You know, we're talking to people from different places, and they're all this intersections going on. And it's a kind of a churn there. You know, and how do you find your place? Well, you dig back deep into your own history, and perhaps not as a story only, but also find the graphic trace and the gestures within that to, you know, find those things. I mean, I've started doing some stuff in terms of the landscape, looking at the landscape and seeing the patterning in trees and stuff like that. And then I start to see the kind of patterns that the Indigenous have in their paintings, etc., that's sort of coming into that. And that seems to speak with the true voice, you know. And I think that's the responsibility of artists, you know, Indian artists, to find those things that they graphically identify within their own culture and sort of bring that to an international audience. And that feels the strongest. I mean, you get Simeon talked a bit about, you know, the color and gesture and stuff, and you find those traces in a lot of and dance in terms of Bollywood productions. But I'm sure you can trace a lot of those things back, and those gestures and stuff back to other historical moments within the Indian culture.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, over to you, Vikrant.
I just wanted to add, like recently, the animation series by the Green Gold production company, like Chota Bheem and all, and these are really, really becoming very popular. And my daughter, she has been watching Chota Bheem, which, you know, she just found on herself, and because the stories are so embedded within the Indian mythological cultures, Ramayana and Mahabharata, and she now knows some of the stories which we didn't even share with her. And it has come through the animation stories, which is there now on Amazon and Netflix and all. So it's really good to see. And when it came to storytelling via animation, while there are lots of technicians and technology is very good in India, their own storytelling abilities and reaching out to the audience was never effective, because India was always looking at and comparing. The comparison problem which Indian audience have with anything made indigenously or in India with Hollywood or abroad, and that comparison always kills the storytelling aspect as well, because everybody is looking at that really slick technological product rather than a good storytelling thing. And because India initially could not compete with that kind of technological or that really high-end, glitzy, glamorous looking animation, that majority of them look down upon watching an animation film from India. But now I'm seeing, and I'm so, you know, taken aback the kind of quality it has coming out, and especially in the field of children animation, the animation for children. It's kind of mind-blowing area where some people have really, really, you know, captured that. And I accidentally watched when my daughter was, you know, flicking through YouTube, and she was watching these particular ABC rhyme when she was only 2 years old. And I watched those Indian kind of animation rhyming ones, and they had 2 billion views or 3 billion views. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, I've never seen Indian companies or animations like for children specifically getting those kind of views, and they were getting that, and very simple ones. But yet, it's there. And now finally it has been recognized. Now people are talking about. So I really see a good future for Indian animation space. And that, of course, with the interest in students, which is huge now as well. So maybe we can just take some audience questions as well. I'm sure because with more than 100 people participating, they would have some questions for us. And we have just less than half an hour.
Vikrant, the skin tones on these animations are very pink.
Which ones?
On this green gold, these green gold animations.
Yeah, they have a very different kind of thing, and that's another kind of that's another issue which will take a whole lot of time about ascription of representation and skin tone colors and all those things. It is changing a bit, but yeah, it has a whole lot of issues around that.
So Vikrant, then we follow up the discussion and we'll take the questions perhaps.
Yep.
Yeah.
Before I tell the questions, I want to say the message for Mr. Simeon from one of our students. He initially mentioned that he's not good in drawing, but he does computer animation very nicely. So one of the students said that she's inspired by this and does not think it as a handicap.
It's cool. It's true. It's not. You're welcome.
I'm sure many of our students and listeners are also inspired like that. So the first question is for Mr. Dirk. He initially had this very interesting point that how, although attention spans have been lessening, but we're also seeking more complex narratives. Why do you think that is? Is it because the lack of attention span also wants more dexterous narratives to engage itself? And what are its implications on storytelling?
Yeah, well, I think just people have been seeing more movies, etc., over time. But it's also something that I experienced because like in the 70s when I first started making films, they'd be half an hour long. If I was making that same film today, I'd make it 5 minutes, But I think it's to do with the way we're just such a mediated society that we're all kind of using technology in all sorts of ways. And we're, like I said before, we're forced to make quick decisions about things. So the challenge for storytelling is to come up with ways to tell your story interestingly and quickly. I mean, I think Vikrant's daughter is a great example of that because even though we saw it was only very short, because of all the expressiveness and all these layers to it, you got a good idea about what she was like, very quickly. I think it's just the way the world's changed, and I think it's a great challenge. I mean, there's greater mobility. Maybe some of it has to do with the way we don't have to remember too much, so we can't concentrate too long. All those things have affected things, but I think as filmmakers and media makers, it's our challenge to kind of break those kind of issues. I think that's my answer. I could talk about it longer, but I've got to be if I'm talking about something succinct, I should be succinct.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Dirk. The next question is towards Dr. Martin. You spoke about a very interesting point, how in your movie, the commercial part was actually a Trojan horse. Where do we draw the compromise? Where do we draw the line?
Where do we draw the line between?
In the sense, your vision in the story you actually want to tell, in the message you want to communicate, and the tools you have to use so that it's accessible to more people or attractive to more people.
It's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I can't pretend to be an expert in that area, and it's a question that plagues me often because I have a new project. I'm part of a new project that's being developed that is seeking to describe research by archaeologists and Indigenous communities into the deep time history of Australia. And we have again gotten commercial broadcasting funds to do this. So we'll be doing a TV series again for a commercial broadcast, a more commercial broadcaster than NITV. And I worry about finding the balance between maintaining the integrity of the story and having to deliver on the commercial parameters that are prescribed to us. And it's a balancing act, and I don't know if we got it right in that motorkite film. I don't know if we managed to construct the Trojan horse. I know that we did that very well with the feature documentary, but for the TV series version of it, I still don't know if we managed to make that balance, that effective balance between honouring these Indigenous nations and their culture and stories, and making an engaging adventure story that was going to appeal to a mass audience. So yeah, like it's a great question. All I'm doing is answering the questions with more questions of my own. So suffice to say, I don't know what that balance. I don't know what that balance is. I think for me, it's the aspiration to try and communicate with integrity and to ensure that we show back the work to the people who, you know, we're honouring, and to see if they feel that we've struck that balance, and to be guided by that as the first kind of point of call. But yeah, I know that doesn't answer the question, but I hope that that's like some way of addressing it.
No, you actually said that it's not possible to answer, but you answered it beautifully, I think. Thank you, Dr. Martin. The third question is towards Dr. Martin and Dr. Kishore, but I think to all of you too. Where does you spoke about micro storytelling in the beginning. In the age of vis-a-vis social media, where many small narratives already exist, from something like the new adaptation of Reels by Instagram, where people make these 30-second videos, and even that format is evolving with music, small narratives. What do you think micro storytelling will evolve? How will it survive in its own, and what format will it take? How will it compete with the narratives already there in social media?
Well, I think micro stories were always there, different kind of stories and different storytellings. And in fact, I have to refer to the presentation yesterday by, I'm forgetting the name of the lady, Kiran, I think. And she was telling those kind of micro stories from folk tales. And she used various, traditional instruments to create that magic of storytelling. It was the folk tales of how parents would tell stories to their kids to make them sleep, or just to talk about mythology or things like that, but in a very small kind of 4 to 5 minutes to can be longer things. And that is always there. Micro stories are always there, and we have been. But it's only through social media that suddenly we, in traditional sense of media, we were only watching feature-length films or short films, or, or those kind of categories. But social media, in a way, has brought in a kind of storytelling which can be small for 10, 20 seconds to 20 hours as well. So there are different kinds of films, and there are different filmmakers. My own experience, 2 years back, I did this first web series for SBS, which is a multicultural channel here. And they asked me to tell stories of Indian diaspora, and I ended up creating 18 short episodes, and all these episodes were between 3 to 4 minutes. And within those 4 minutes, I had to capture the stories of these diasporic Indians, their aspirations, and how aspirations in Australia, and how they belong to both the cultures, and what makes them. So the tagline was, what makes them, the tagline was Indian heart, Australian heartbeat. And at the end, what makes them Australian Indian. So that was the thing which I had to capture. My first iteration, when I did the story of the first episode, I ended up with a 10-minute story, because I was in a traditional way. I was making short documentaries, but for me, short was 30 minutes always. So that was the kind of shortest I used to do. And then coming into this zone and making having a challenge of about between 3 to 4 minutes, it was very challenging. And then again, I got back to 2-3 different iterations, and finally I got down to a 5-minute story. And I sent it to SBS saying that, listen, I can't do any more than this. This particular 5-minute story does justice to the person whose story I'm telling. And the executive producer came back to me saying that, Vikrant, our initial brief to you is between 3 to 3.5 minutes, but for you, we'll give you an exemption. You can do up to 4 minutes of the story. And then I was like, how can I do that? And then I sat and I got my wife and I said, okay, how do we cut this? And how do we still retain that particular whole curve of the story? Okay, the introduction, the middle of the story, and the takeaway, the whole, and the conflict in between. And then at the end, when finally I saw 3.5 minutes, in fact, we ended up making a story of 3 minutes, 27 seconds. And when it went online, this was the first episode, we ended up getting 22,000 views in just 24 hours. And that was phenomenal. And people could, they started putting the comments. And with online media, best thing is that you can receive comments and feedback instantly. And that was my own kind of initiation into micro storytelling in online media. And now I really enjoy the space, and I'm trying to tell stories in that particular format. Anyway, I don't want to take too much of time. So this was my kind of experience. Martin, would you like to add yours?
Yeah, again, a really great question. I think back to what Dirk was just talking about before, where, you know, previously a half-hour film has been compressed because of attention spans and the general audience's increased media literacy, I suppose, but we're able to read images with much more nuance and complexity, I think, now than even 30, 40 years ago. And so you have to have faster or more sophisticated strategies to be able to capture people. And yeah, like Vikrant, I love the space of these small stories and thinking about how they add up, you know, to create that kind of prism of an environment or of a collective of people, of a range of different memories, ideas, communities. It seems to be a much more human way of telling stories because it represents the diversity, the plurality of our viewpoints, and that is a really, you know, wonderful thing. In terms of its sustainability, I keep on thinking about, you know, this resurgence of slow cinema that it seems to be bubbling up a little bit, and immersive screen-based experiences like, you know, these wraparound screens, virtual reality, and even games which people play for hours and hours and hours. And so I think we're, you know, there's a new kind of, well, there's a return to this old way maybe that's opening up, where people will spend more time watching something move slowly. Slow TV, slow cinema is, you know, having a bit of a moment, I think, or has had a moment. And it's funny, maybe, so I suppose what my point is like, maybe there will be a reaction to this kind of fragmented and micro narrative, and people will want kind of slower, more immersive experiences. But yeah, at the moment, I personally am having a lot of fun making stuff in this space too. So yeah.
Could I add something to that too? I remember I used to do this exercise for people having to do film trailers in one of the units I used to do. And I used to say to them, just keep cutting it back until it doesn't make any sense anymore. And then take a step back, and that's your film. You know, to the point where before it stops making sense. And also, when you're talking about that durational thing, Martin, I was thinking I've been starting to do this project where I go down to the bay and kind of film these shots of the bay, the horizon line, and I sit there for about an hour but I kind of end up with, like, I do it in time lapse, so I end up with 10, 15 seconds of film. So I think in my head, I'm trying to go through this process where I'm looking for things and impressions, and I'm hoping that I kind of capture them in a kind of more compacted way. You know, I don't think that's just kind of my way of trying to deal with the kind of dilemma that you pointed out about duration and instantaneousness.
Thank you so much. All of you gave such nuanced and comprehensive answers. Dr. Kishore, you actually answered the next question also that I was about to ask. Thank you so much. So before further ado, I would like to call Dr. Sushmita Bala, HOD DME Media School, to share her words about today's session.
Thank you, Sachin. Good morning, everybody. It was indeed a wonderful discussion. It was enriching, enlightening session to all viewers, students, and others. Thanks to Mr. Simon, Dr. Doug, Dr. Martin, Mr. Simeon Taylor, and very much thanks to Dr. Vikrant Kishore and Dr. Satsina conducting this type of discussion, panel discussion. I liked very nice project and visuals also. Very much like Pari's performance. Very nice, yes. I enjoyed everything. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for like nice presentation, nice panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sushmita Bala.
Thank you.
I would now like to deliver the vote of thanks. Firstly, a very warm thank you to Dr. Martin Potter, Dr. Silman Wilmot, Dr. Simeon Taylor, Mr. Doug De Bruyne, and Dr. Vikrant Kishore for conducting such a wonderful session. I would now like to thank our student team, Ishita Tadiyal, Priyanka Nethani, Shreya Singh, Gunjan Joshi, Ayush Goyal, Shubham Mandal, Siddharth Kukreja, Mayank Vaish, Ashray Mathur, Aditi Katyal, Simran Kaur, Sagrika Basak, Amit Mathur, and Rishabh Jain. Thank you for making the fest possible.
Sachin, I will request Dr. Vikrant Kishore to make the final.
I'm so sorry, sir.
Sorry?
Dr.
I
Kishore, if you could
request
make the
Dr.
final
Vikrant
remarks.
Kishore to make the final remark. I think that is something that was somewhat missing. Would you like to say something?
No. I'm fine with that. My final thing is that, firstly, thanks to all my colleagues here, Dirk, Martin, Simon, and Simon, for sparing their time and sharing their valuable thoughts about their projects and films. And as I said that initially, that we don't get so much of time to discuss about each hour's project and to know about what we are doing. And this was not only a panel which was fruitful for all the participants here, but for me also, it was a very, very kind of a great session to hear all my esteemed colleagues here. And thanks to this particular collaboration between DME and Deakin in its second year that we have been able to do that. And maybe due to COVID, we were able to come in full force and participate much more than possible in physical situation, because then we would have been always thinking about who's going to travel, do we have the budget, all those things. But now we can always follow this kind of hybrid mode where, people who can travel, good enough. If we can't, then the virtual Zoom sessions are so good, and you don't feel like you are sitting somewhere else, and it's like another world. It's a very good venue, and plus we get so much of participation. I'm seeing throughout we are getting between 100 to 200 people on any particular panel, and which is a good kind of a thing. And probably we'll have to also find ways to engage our Deakin students more, and we'll find ways to do that. But it was good to get them on the panel as well. So yeah, thank you so much. And I would ask any of the panelists if they want to share their last words. So
yeah.
Just thank you. That's great. Could be chat.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Martin.
I was going to say the same thing. Just thanks. Thank you so much for organising all of this and for inviting me and us along. And it's been wonderful to be a part of it. So thank you.
Yeah. Samuel?
Um, same as everyone, and actually, it's been a real pleasure to, you know, my fellow panel members. It's been a pleasure to see what they've been up to and some of the stuff that they've done. And yeah, just like you were saying, Vikrant, you know, the fact that we're here in Australia and there's people, well, lots of people from India and people from all over the world. It's just like really cool.
Yeah. Simon, would like to
Yeah.
listen from you finally.
Yes, thank you, Ambrish, and thank you, your team, for for putting this on. And it was terrific to be able to talk to your group, and hopefully this will develop in, and we'll find more interesting ways. It will develop on into, you know, increasingly interesting ways of using Zoom to engage in this forum. And so I really look forward to seeing how this develops over the next 5 years at least.
Thank you. Yeah. Sachin?
Thank you so much again to all our panelists. Continuing with the vote of thanks, I would like to further thank Mr. Ritvik Ghosh and Mr. Sumantra Das, who have made such an innovation possible where we are streaming on dual platforms. Thank you so much. The core team of CIFFI and our fellow faculty members at DME Media School who have been working 24/7, just like Mr. Ghosh and Mr. Das, and who have made this fest possible despite the logistical challenges of pandemic and current scenario. I want to thank Mr. Anmol Mehta, who has always been with us and without irrespective of time to help us. I want to thank the management of DME, who has always supported us in all our endeavors. I would like to thank Dr. Vikrant Kishore, who has always entertained all our repeated requests and any requirements we have had during the film festival. Thank you so much, sir. Lastly, I would like to thank Dr. Amrish Saxena and Dr. Sushmita Bala, who have ideated this fest and inspired us to always do better. And not to forget our festival partners, Vigyan Prasar, CMS Vatavaran, Kids Cinema 2020, We Care Film Festival, our international, Delhi International Film Festival, our university partner, Adamas University, and institutional partner, Indian Documentary Producers Association, Indian Academy of Shorts, and our media partners, The Pioneer and Policy Times. We're also thankful to our festival ambassador, Mr. Tigmanshu Dhulia, for extending his support to us. Thank you. And yes, the second masterclass of CIFFI 2020 is waiting for you. Exploration of Mind and Relationships in Hindi Films, conducted by Dr. Namrata Joshi at 1 p.m. See you all then.